morning. We're in Hemshech Tzaddik Dalet on page 139 at the top, which corresponds to pages 1157, 1158 in Ayin Beis, volume 2. And the discussion is the second type of Bittul, second Eifin, the second type or level of Bittul in the Oyer. And now he's calling it a Bittul that's in the very Metzias, in the very existence of Oyer. Not just as it relates to something greater than it, which is the first level, but in itself senses that it has no existence without its source. Now, just to sum up, so we learned that Oyer, as opposed to Yesh, a Yesh does not have this sense. A Yesh is created explicitly in a way that is not dovuk, that it's not attached and not connected in any conscious way to its source. So it's a creation through einarech. The way it's created is in a leap. So that the creation, the product, does not sense, does not indicate on its creator. Oyer, on the other hand, is created in the form of dveikus. He says, not kiruv mamish, because ultimately Atzmus is beyond Oyer, but not b'derech richuk either. Meaning that the Oyer is a revelation of the source, a reflection. And like he said, it's dovuk, it's dveikus. And being that it's connected to its source and it senses its source, therefore it feels like it has no existence but the source, like we learned earlier about the sunlight and the sun. And he said, with this we'll understand the depth of the difference between the two levels or the two forms of Bittul. One is a Bittul that is, he says, a Bittul Naila, headed Tfisas Mokum. It's a lofty and a high level of Bittul, of sublimation, but it is ultimately, as a result, it does not change its existence. The existence of the thing that's bottle, like the flame, does not become no longer a flame. It's just the Bittul of the Oyer of the flame, its impact, its function, the light of the flame. But the flame itself remains the same flame, the same candle, even when the light of the sun is overshadowing it. Like a Chacham Gadol and a Chacham Katan as well. The Chacham Gadol, in the presence of the Chacham Gadol, the Chacham Katan, the lesser wise one, is nullified. But it's not that he ceases to exist. And he gave an example with ministers, Sari HaMeluchim, ministers of an empire, of a nation, that when they sit in the highest tier, as he said, their position, their post, they control, the words he used was, they sit b'Rishena b'Malchus, all the laws that are all the laws that are determined and govern the nation is based on their authority. They have even the power to give life and the opposite of life, to establish laws and so on, and to enforce them, to establish laws and to apply them. However, when they stand before the king or the leader of the nation, of the country, they're completely mizbatlim bebitl kol mohusam behedet tfisas mokum klal. That they're completely nullified as if nothing. They're completely nullified and insignificant in the face of the king, before the king. And yet, when they go back and they leave the king's presence, they go back to their posts, they remain with exactly the same strength and maybe even more so. Lepomim, and at times more so. Because this Bittul, Eine Negei B'Amitzias, it did not impact their actual existence. It impacted their function, like he said, it relates more to the Bittul of their Mohus, meaning their inner personality, but not the Mitzias. I'm reading now the top of page 139. By contrast, the Bittul and Be'efin HaBeis, the second type of Bittul. there the existence itself is not an existence on its own. It senses that kim kom mitzius mitzad mekede. Hinin bittul zen negei ba mitzius mamish. This bittul impacts the very existence of the entity because it does not feel it has any value of its own. It's only due to its source. And the ministers don't necessarily feel that. The ministers feel nullified and are nullified in the presence, but that their whole existence is due to the king, and without the king they don't exist. They not necessarily feel that level. Okay, that's where we stop. Now he's going to go on, and if you remember, in Ayin Beis, now was a parenthesis. He's yesh leimer that this bittul benivroim is the bittul when they that recognize tzva shemayim and tzva oretz, both the celestial bodies in heaven, the heavenly bodies, and the earth ones, that their kiyum, whether it's the perpetuation of the individual or the perpetuation of the species, is not b'koyach hatzmei, it's b'koyach habeira. He said that is a similarity to the bittul that we're talking about, because your whole existence and perpetuation and sustenance is due to something that's not you. And we discussed then what exactly, and he said the difference is bittul hayesh and bittul mitzias. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe in the next literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages is going to be discussing that. So the next thing is all based on one short piece in Ayin Beis about the bittul and Ivraim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe turns it into something far, far, far reaching. In Ayin Beis, it was a parenthesis, Yashlemer, that we have something like this in Ivraim. Look how the Frierdiker Rebbe starts. The Yuvan Zebe Muchash. And this will be understood in a palpable way, in a tangible way. Muchash means when you like something you can relate to directly. He says, I saw it b'muchash. It means it's like with a full something that you can relate to directly, b'muchash. Like you could touch it, it's tangible. Obviously here he's not talking about physical touch, but means that something that you can completely relate to on our terms. So he says what? We'll understand this b'muchash in a very tangible and palpable way when we look at it how it's an Aveda. In Ayin Beis, he didn't say these words, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is deriving from Ayin Beis that this is the pshat. That now to understand this second level of bittul, we'll understand it b'muchash in a very tangible, palpable way, the way it is in Aveda. So he's translating now to Aveda, which means how it is by us. The bittul zeh b'nivroim hu, this bittul number 2, the second level, the second type of bittul. By b'nivroim, not by oir. He's going to explain how this type of bittul applies to us. The nivroim creation, he says, hu ahergesh, that's the feeling, shekol inyan kiyum hamitzias v'chayis and nivroim, that the whole matter of the sustenance or the kiyum hamitzias, the very kiyum, the very sustainability of existence, v'chayis and nivroim, and the vitality in the creations, in all the creatures, hurak mitzad tzeni yizbarach. So it's the hergish recognizing, and not just recognizing, hergish, the feeling that the entire existence, its entire very existence and its vitality is only due to the tzeni yizbarach, to God's will. And without that, it wouldn't exist. Now, we're not getting now into the bittul hayesh, bittul mitzias, that's going to come a lot later. Right now, he's just establishing that there is, in Aveda, what is the difference between bittul number 1 and bittul number 2? Bittul number 1 is that you stand in awe and you're completely nullified because something so much greater than you. Like a candle in the light of the sun, like the ministers before the king. The second bittul, level of bittul, or the second type of bittul, is that you sense that your entire existence is not yours. The entire existence is being sustained and being energized by the Ratzon Hashem. That hergish is the second level of bittul. So it's actually affecting your existence, doesn't have any true value. It's only a result of Ratzon Hashem. So now he's going to explain, and as I said, this is based on the Ayin Beis He just uses a few lines, but most of this is now the language of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Hine Ksiv, because now it says, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. First pasuk. It says that in the beginning God created heaven and earth. The Kol HaNivroim Mischalkim is using the pasuk to explain Tzva Shamayim and Tzva Aretz is all based on the pasuk. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. Doesn't just mean heaven and earth. It also means all the creatures in heaven and all the creatures in earth. The Kol HaNivroim, all of the creation, all the creatures that exist, Mischalkim, divide, break down into the Tzva Shamayim. Tzva, as I mentioned, means literally army, but it's referring to the celestial bodies in heaven. This includes sun and the moon and the stars and the Golgalim and the spheres, anything that is not on earth, Vitzva Oretz. And the army on earth, meaning the army on earth. And what's the army on earth? That's all the creatures on earth. Demem Tzameya Chai Medaber. Actually, Tzva Oretz can probably mean mostly Chaya Medaber. Probably Tzameach and Demem. Because I don't think Demem is also Kayomim Beish. Tzameach is not. Okay, that's irrelevant to this discussion here. Okay, so but Hashemayim v'sa'aretz. So it's two general categories under which all creation fits, whether it's heavenly creations or earthly ones. And here, heavenly doesn't mean ruchnis. We're not talking about angels and neshamas. We're talking about tzva shamayim, the sky, whatever is in the atmosphere and beyond. So all the universe, all the solar systems, and so on. Okay. The tzva aretz kayomim b'min. The creatures on earth, they perpetuate and are sustained in their species. The species continues, meaning basically parent, child. The tzva shamayim kayomim b'ish. And the celestial or heavenly bodies, they are sustained and they perpetuate b'ish, meaning individual. The sun remains the same sun and perpetuates throughout its time during creation, during the time existence of the universe. Shekol zehu b'ritzein yizbarach. All this, meaning both these forms of perpetuation, kiyum, whether it's the species or it's the individual, is b'ritzein yizbarach. Is by will of God. He's going to say it later, but the reason for that is because nothing on earth has that power. What has the power to perpetuate? Why doesn't the species go extinct? Why doesn't the sun burn out? Because there's a force that's not mortal that's giving it a type of infinite or eternal power for as long as it will last. Obviously, there's a time period, Shital Fishnin, 6,000 years, but that's because that's the designated time God gave it until it expires. But in other words, the key thing to remember here is that existence has in it a power that's stronger than the individual. None of us can perpetuate ourselves. Who gave us the power to give birth? And our child should give birth and it should continue on and on. So that's a koyach. Some places the expression koyach ein sof. He'll use that later, but right now, just that's beratzon yisbarach. God wanted it to be that way. V'zeu Beis, and now he's going to go into a longer elaboration on this. I state again, all this is the Frierdiker Rebbe now. The language of the Rebbe Rashab will be returned to on page 144. From here on, if I look correctly, it's all the Frierdiker Rebbe in explaining the Ayin Beis. He says, V'zeu Beis efone his bonus. Remember, he stated at the outset that we're going to understand this b'muchash with avodah. So he's now spelling out what is the avodah, what is the Bittul Nevroim, how do you reach this type of awareness? So he says, "V'zeu beis efane hasbananus." How do you come to this awareness and hergish sense that everything is beratzon yisbarach? So he says it's through two forms of contemplation. Hisbananus, b'mashikosav, two forms of hisbananus. And what it says in the pasuk, "Marabu masech avaya." So there's one pasuk that says, "Marabu," how great Ma'asecha Havaya is the handiwork, or Ma'asecha, the actions of God. And then Uksiv, Magadlu Ma'asecha. Marabu, I'm sorry, I said great. No, Marabu means how many, the multitude. Rabu from the word Rav, many. Ribui. Uksiv, and the second verse says, Magadlu Ma'asecha Havaya. How great. It's more echus. Rabu means how many, and Gadlu means how great, which means quality. And the first is quantity. And here are the two, and these are the two forms of contemplation. The Marabu Masech Havaya, when we say Marabu Masech Havaya, how many, the multitude, are Masecha, are your God's actions, creations, who is Bananus Beribui Hanevroim, the Tzva Oretz. That's a contemplation on the Ribui Hanevroim, the multitude of creations. In other words, the many. There's so many different forms, so many creatures, and so many all over, including species. The Ribui Hanevroim, the Tzva Oretz, of the creations on earth. The Ima Yes, the Gam Tzva Oretz, Yeshnem Bruyim Gdelim, even though on the creatures on earth, earthly creatures, they're also very they're also very great ones. In other words, they're not just as many of them, there's also when you say Gdelim here, you could say many large ones, or you could say many have also they're quality ones. Not sure, he means probably both. So then why do you say Rabu? Gadlu also applies to the Tzva Ha'aretz. Says Mekol Mokim, nevertheless, Hinei Ha'ikar the Tzva Ha'aretz, the primary so-called feature of the creatures on earth, Hu Haribui, V'lo in Hagedel. It's the many and not the size. It can be size, it can be quality. Not sure whether he means like, large animals, let's say an elephant or a whale. Because Gadlu, it seemed to me that Gadlu meant echus, more quality. So then why would he bring how big the animal is? Basically, when you say Gadlu Masecha, it can mean both large and it could also mean great in quality. So he's saying, so why do we say Marabu? Because the main feature is the many creatures. Okay. Lo'in hagedel. So gedel definitely means both, I think, size, great, large in size, and large in quality. The ikirin hagadus ben Evroim gdelim hu b'tzva shamayim. On the contrary, and by contrast, the primary focus of gadlus on Evroim means their size and their greatness. I'll tell you the truth. I'm stepping back for a moment. I may have misspoken by saying that Gadlu is echus. In many places it does say that, and I thought that's what he was leading to. It could be that the Gadlus he means size as well. Rabu is quantity as many creatures, but the largest ones are in heaven, like the sun. There's no creature on earth that's as large as the sun. The sun is larger than the entire earth. And the same thing with the solar system. So it could be that not necessarily even talking about quality. It could be talking about quality as well, but I want to just rephrase, since he didn't say quality, I don't want to impose my understanding of it. So I'm backtracking and saying, right now, what we know for sure is that Rabu is many, and not necessarily how large they are in size, and Rabu and Gadlu, is their size. So he's saying, so even though there are large creatures on earth, but the focus, the primary is not the largeness, but the many, how many there are. The main primary focus on size and large and immensity is in Tzva Shamayim. So right now let's focus on, so it's both quantity, the question is quantity of the number of how many. Like, for example, there are a lot more species on earth than there are in heaven, but there are much larger bodies in heaven than there are on earth. Not just species, also actual creatures. So he says, Vahainu, this means the B'tzva Shamayim, in celestial bodies. Hariyesh Beis Inyanim. There are two things. Ribui v'gadlus. Many and godless greatness. which again I think could mean size. It could also mean quality. We'll see in a minute. And in the creatures on earth, even though by them there also exist nivroim g'delim, great large creatures, biyeser, very large creatures, avol ikram hu haribui, v'kol echad ma'adalat chelkei deimim tzemeach chaim medaber. But the primary so-called thing that, like in a sense, really impresses us is the sheer volume. How many? In Daimim, in Semeya, Chayim, Medaber, in every one of the four kingdoms or the four domains of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. So how many creatures are there on this earth? Billions and trillions even. And even beyond. So that's its main feature, like when you're mizbeinen on the greatness of God. So the focus, even though there are large creatures, like I mentioned, a whale, an elephant, or whatever other large creatures there are. But the main impressive quality is the sheer volume and the multitude. In heaven, he says both. There's many and godless, and there's it's immense size. That's what he's saying here. So Oretz, the focus is more on volume, on Ribui, Rabu. In Shamayim, even though there's both Ribui and godless, but there, godless, of course, the thing that stands out most. Okay. Not sure why he says there's both Ribui and godless, so then why does the Pasuk say Magadlu Masecha? Okay, fine. The Levad HaRibui, and he's continuing to explain now this multitude, this large volume. Besides the many, the Ribui, the volume, B'chol min prati, in each specific species, in other words, how many ants are there? How many birds are there? How many types of cats are there? Like how many lions are there, etc. So despite the number of volume of each species, and he's going to give it, like for example, the domain, the mineral domain, min ha'avonim. So how many stones are there? In the species just called a stone. How many times? There are many, there's so many. He says, besides that, so besides the multitude of each, the number within each species, it also has a tremendous, muflag would be I want to find the strongest word I can find. Ribui muflag means not just many, an exorbitant amount. Ribui muflag. That's a tremendous numbers of minim b'minim shenim ma'avonim pshutes. That not just within one type of stone. Let's say, take a diamond. So there are many of diamonds. But in the stones themselves, you have many different types of species. What's the focus on the word pshutes? Yeah, it means simple stones. It means not precious stones. He's going to say in a minute, avonim tevis. So just in simple stones, let's not use diamonds. That's not a good example in pshutes. Pshutes means in stones itself, besides the fact that there's one family of a stone. I don't even know the names of different stones. I'm not talking about precious stones. So besides in the one family, there's so many individual stones, there are also minim and minim shenim, different species and different types. And of course, each one of them has also many within that category of simple stones. Bichiluki minim rabim behem gufa. And within each species, there's further a breakdown of subspecies, so to speak, subcategories in each one of them itself. Ad avonim tevis ubalis gules shenis. We haven't even spoken about, now he's saying, till the point that there's avonim tevis, precious stones, and ones that have special gulas, special effects, special powers, so to speak. Like, for example, let's say a mineral like, let's say, a magnet, or others. Like, today we know in the element and the table of elements, you have uranium, you have other elements that all have their own particular features and properties. Okay. He's introducing now, there's the world of crystals, which some in the difference, even in Sifrei Teres Chazal, talk about different stones and crystals that have particular features that help. They're like a zgula to help a person in any particular area. So he's specifically spelling out Avnei Hachein v'Hatzlocha. There are crystals or stones that Avnei is more than just stones, also crystals that are particular increase in chen and grace and atzloch and success. So it's a zgula. I am trying to refer to a particular Maimon Chazal. For example, it says about Avram Avinu. It says Avram Berach Hashem Avram Bakel. What's Bakel? So Rashi says two interpretations, and one of them that he had a stone around him. It was a zgula for brachas and atzloch. Forgot the lashon of Rashi exactly. So, you also in the Teva, for example, when it says Aseh Lecha Teva, it says Aseh Tseyar, Tasel Teva. So one opinion said is a window, another opinion said it was a bright stone that gave off light. The point here is that different crystals or stones or mineral world, let's start different minerals, that may be the best word. I should have used it earlier. Minerals that have certain strengths. Even in the human being, there's certain minerals, like calcium is a mineral, iron is a mineral. They have different minerals that are necessary that actually help a person grow, and a zgula for different have different features. So he's bringing here several of them, just to demonstrate here the variety, the volume, that how many different types there are. So there's Avnei Hachein v'Hatzlocha. That chen is usually translated as grace, and Hatzlocha is success. V'Avnei HaChochma v'Haskola. And minerals or crystals that are connected to Chochma v'Haskola, wisdom and Haskola, and conceiving ideas. Ulehepech, and you also have negative ones that have a negative impact. Avnei Germeit Tzoris v'Yisudim Chaz v'Shalom. Minerals or crystals that actually cause tzoris. And tzoris is afflictions, and I'm sorry, tzoris would be, how would you translate tzoris? Tzoris is that cause Yisurim, I would translate afflictions. Tzoris means problems. Chaz v'shalom, God forbid.
Like that guy who contributed billions to the Democratic Party, tzoris.
Okay. So this is really somewhat tangential, but he's giving examples, because remember, he's talking about his bonus. And when you do a contemplation, you want to have things to hold on to. So he's actually describing, okay, you say, okay, it's one thing to say the world consists of the physical, the earthly creatures, there are many multitudes, but he's breaking it down that the multitudes include, and just to sum up, besides that each species has many, there are many different types of species and subspecies, from one, even in simple minerals, and to the point you get to actually special ones, precious ones, or with special qualities. That's what he's using here to just explain. So when you contemplate on all of this, you just share the sheer volume of different variety that God created. Hine levad zeis. Oh, 1 second. How many levad zeises are here? Hold on. Let me just see something. The levad haribi b'chol min prati, k'mo b'chelik hadem b'minav yesh b'zeh ribu muflik b'minav. Okay, actually, I read it a bit differently, but it doesn't change the pshat. He was saying min here. I thought he meant in the stone, there's different minim. He meant in the min of stone, meaning in the 4 kingdoms, in the 4 domains of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. He says, besides the fact that in every one, in one min itself, that's what he says. I'll just read it again. The levad haribi b'chol min prati. Besides the multitude in each one of these four, like for example, daimon, b'chelik hadaimon b'min havonim, in the daimon in stones, you have all the different a multitude, a tremendous, an awesome amount of number of different species in stones itself, simple stones. And within that itself, you have many different subspecies. And then you have add another to the Avonim itself, Avonim Tevis, minerals that we just spoke about, with special effects. So now he's saying that was all in Daimon. Milvad, now he goes on and says like this. Hine levad zeis, besides this multitude that we just described, hine gam b'chol echad ma'minim, hari b'chol haribu sheyesh b'amin hahu atzmei. So in each one of these species, in all the multitude that exists within each one of these species, these domains, so besides the multitude, they're also not similar to one another. Even in the same min, in the same species or in the same domain, even in that same thing, they're not similar to one another. So basically saying that besides the fact that there's so many different types, they're also different from each other. That's the key thing he's adding here. That's in Daimon. And the same thing is in Tzemeach, in the world of vegetation, the world of flora. And the animal kingdom. The bemin echad mamish, that in one species, even one species, hine bariba shlei eina echad mehem deimel zolase. So even if, for example, you have, let's say, in the species called a rose, a flower called a rose. In the rose itself, one rose is not like another. In animals, let's say the tiger kingdom. One tiger is not like another. Like we know by human beings. Even though the human species is one general species, one person is not similar to another. So basically he's saying that in addition to the many, it could also have been many, but they're duplicates, like clones. He says they're not duplicates. Even in the same species, one is not like the other. Meaning even two, let's say, quartz stone. One quartz is not like another. That's what he's saying here. So the difference is not just in many, but they're also one different from the other. So that just adds to the hispilus, to the awe of just how many, not just as there are many, but there's also how different, even in the same species there are, how different they are. He goes with an example. Like take a tree. Let's take the oak, the family of the oak trees. I'm just using the word oak. Could be cedar, could be different things. So oh, you know what? My mistake. Like in one, he's actually giving an example of one actual tree. One tree. A single tree. Besides the fact that the branches that extend from the tree, from that tree, so one branch is not similar to another branch. Also the leaves. Even though all the leaves on this one tree, they all carry themselves one description, the leaves of the tree, which has a certain family. They're different than the leaves of another species. So even though they're all generally the leaves of this one tree, Toyer Echad. So let's say the leaves of an oak tree or the leaves of a pine tree. So overall, these are the leaves of a pine tree. Nevertheless, Asher b'teir echad klali, general clear. Asher b'teir zeh hem nivdalim ha'olim shel ha'ilon tapuchim ha'olim shel ilon aguzim. This general description of the leaves distinguishes them. For example, the tree, an apple tree from a nut tree. So they have different types of leaves. Hine b'chol zeh hari ha'olim atzmam hem chalukim zeh mezeh. The leaves of the apple tree, even though in general it's called the leaves of an apple tree and it's different than the leaves of a nut tree. However, within those leaves themselves of the apple tree, hem chalukim zeh mezeh be'efen asher lo yimtzu shnei olim shavim legamri mamish. To the point, you'll not find two equal leaves even in that same tree. So every leaf is a little different than another one. Bedugmas dovar, as an example to this, kamoi b'min hamedaber, this is similar to the fact that we find in the human domain, the human species, hari ein partzafei and shavin. There are no two people have the same face. Ukamay merazal, like Razal saying Sanhedrin, Perek Dalet Mishnah Hey. Oh, Kamay Merazal, that's what it says in Kamay Merazal. That's the song. Okay. So all this is a contemplation. So when you're focusing on Morabu Masecha, all this is part of Morabu Masecha. How many Masecha creations have you made? So the many is in volume, the many is in distinction of one species from another, and the many is that even in the same species, one creature of that species and another one are also different from one another. All this is included in Morabu Masecha. Umelech Malchei Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is part of the Mishnah in the Sanhedrin, that the king of all kings, the Eibishter, Tova Kol Odam, Tova means he engraved, he embedded each human being b'chesmei shel Adam Harishan, with the seal of Adam Harishan. Now the example the Mishnah uses, it's like, let's say you have a seal, a ring with a seal. It's the same seal, but you could put that seal and make an impression in many different pieces of wax. So Adam Harishan was the template, so to speak. God created the Adam B'Tselem Elokim. So he is the template. And it says in the Mishnah there that all human beings are created with the seal of Adam Harishan, meaning with the structure and the image of Adam. So they all have the same template. Human beings have a healthy human being, 2 eyes, 2 ears, mayach, leiv, kavod. The structure is the same, but the details is that not one is similar to the other, which is, of course, Adover Pella. Because if you would, for example, if you were to do this in a physical engineering, like I said, with a ring, with a seal, and you just replicate, it can be an exact copy. It's like a clone. But here, even though the general structure is the same, all humans, like we said before with the leaves, they're all apple leaves, apple tree leaves. But within itself, one is not similar to the other. She says, "Kenu gam ba'olim." Same is true with the leaves that we discussed. That even though they are all part of one species, let's say an apple tree or a nut tree, but within that itself, there's all this. Not one is similar to the other. V'cheinu b'chol mitzias proti sheb'chol min proti ma'dalet chelkei datzcham dem tzmeichem medaber. And the same is true in every individual, every distinct creature, or every distinct entity. Within each min prati, within each specific species in the 4 general domains of mineral, vegetable, animal, human. Shari behalazeh, that this great multitude, every one individual has its own individual energy or life force, that's commensurate. I'm not sure what he means inyan gufay, Does he mean like gufa, like for its very need, or does he mean its body? Lifi efun gufe, lifi inyan gufe. According to its body, it's probably, according to its structure, it's probably what he means, the inyan gufe. And the inyan gufe, ve'oise hata'elish hanirtzim b'hanivrahu l'klolisin habriya. And commensurate and tailored to that te'elis hanirtza, which means to that positive benefit of that creation. In other words, why was it created? Because it provides a certain benefit to existence, to the universe. So each has its own individual life force that is commensurate, that's tailored to its goof, to its, in other words, actually goof means, obviously a life force in a tiger is different than a life force in a plant. And within each one, but he's saying here, even in each tiger itself. And for the purpose, the tails means a benefit, nitza means a positive benefit. Its role that it plays in the general creation, because each detail plays a particular role to benefit all of creation. It's all like pieces of they're all necessary pieces of a large so-called organism. And this is what means marabu masecha. How many masecha are your deeds, God? Are God's deeds, actions? Shem ribui mine hanevroim, referring to the ribui mine hanevroim, the multitude of different species. Ad ein ketz v'shir klal, without limit and without any measure, meaning it's like endless. He doesn't mean literally blig vul, obviously, but he means to the point where, from our point of view, it's like endless. How many? Do we know? We can't even count. It's beyond. We talk about every form of species, from the mineral through the animal, through the vegetation, through the animal, the human. V'kula mushgochim b'ashgocha pratis, and they all are governed by specific hashgacha pratis, divine governance. Doesn't say divine, by specific governance, like we know from the Baal Shem Tov, that even how a leaf turns in the wind is hashgacha pratis, is governed and from by the Eibishter, it's specific detail, not just in general. Okay, so this whole piece here that we just learned is a full hisbonus. The Frierdiker Rebbe laid out a full contemplation. Amorabu Masach Hashem. This, of course, is leading us to come to understand that when you contemplate properly in Nivroim on this idea, you come to realize all this is mitzad Ritzeni Yisbarach, like you just said, all this is due because God wanted to put all this into place. So the multitude and all the details, and that one is different than the other, all in fulfilling the general purpose and goal and purpose of creation, is all the goal here is to come to realize that all this is not man-made. This that we didn't create. This is all due to Ratzon Habeira, to God's plan, God's will. But he hasn't yet concluded that. Okay, so before we go further, and I'm ready to go to the next chapter, you want to ask anything, or it's pretty straightforward, I think. Okay, so let's just move on. Perek Chof Tes. Yeah, all this is the Frierdiker Rebbe elaboration. It says, Omnom kol zeh hu tzva haaretz. All this we just described is the creatures on earth. Shebehem nemar maraba masach havaya. Upon to whom it applies, and to whom it is said, about whom it said, how many are your actions, God's actions? The he's repeating what he said before. Even though among the creatures on earth, there are very massive creatures. Very massive creatures. But the primary thing that stands out is the multitude, is the numbers, the volume. Now he goes to Tzva Shamayim. Aval b'Tzva Shamayim, when we're talking about the celestial bodies, the bodies in heaven. In Ksiv ma gadlu masecha havaya, ma'oid omku machshavesecha. Here it says now, ma gadlu, the word gadlu, not marabu. Gadlu means greatness, as in gedel, as in size. And he brings now the second half of the pasuk, which he didn't cite before. Ma'oid omku machshavesecha. How deep? Ma'oid omku, very deep are your thoughts, God. In other words, now he's talking about something that is going into not only volume, but going some to Gadlu and Omku. So he's going to explain what that means. The mitzvah ha'oretz, the ksiv buhu morabu masech havaya, from the creatures on earth, upon which it says, how many are your products, your actions, your creations. Onu yedim, we know shekulam b'chochma sisa. We know that everything was done with, you did everything with chachma, with wisdom. So though he didn't use before the word wisdom, but clearly it's wisdom, because there's first of all, how they all interact with each other. The mere fact that every one of them has their own design. So it shows on a tremendous wisdom, creation of so many different type of species, and each species, all the details that we spoke about before. Isa b'Zayar, and it says in Zayar, Kulam b'chochma sisa b'bina. The Zayar adds, even though the pasuk says Kulam b'chochma, you've done it all with chochma, he says you did it with chochma b'bina, with bina. Chochma, in other words, through bina, which we're going to explain now. The Zayar, the Rebbe gives us with Zayar, volume 3, 43a in the footnote. So what does this mean? Chochma and b'bina. Says Shascholas say Savasu. I'm turning the page to page 140 now. The beginning of creation, the beginning of bringing everything into being, who Misfiras HaChochma. It all starts with a spark, with a nekuda, with a Sfiras HaChochma. Kulam Chochma Sisa. Chochma is like the first idea. Without that, you don't have anything. U'kamosh Kosa Bereshis Bara Lekim. Like it says, Bereshis bara Elokim, he brought this pasuk at the top of last page. So the Targum Yenuson teaches, the Metargum in Aramaic, the Bereshis Targum Yenuson b'chuchmasa. So we know many meanings in Bereshis, but the Targum teaches b'chuchmasa, with wisdom. With his wisdom. So we see from this that Bereshis bara Elokim created with wisdom. The plan with an intelligence. Razal say Bereshis Nami Maimerhu. In explaining how do we get 10 Maimaris, 10 statements that God used to create the world. There's only 9 when you count from Yehi Oyer to Nasa Adam B'Tzalmedim, it's only 9. So the Gemara says that Bereshis is also a Maimer. The first verse, Bereshis Bara Lekim, even though it doesn't say a specific Yehi Oyer or Yehi Rakia, Bereshis Nami Maimerhu. Why is he bringing that? So he's going to say, because that Maimer, that statement is different than all the others. Shehu Maimer Kloli al Klolasin Habriya. So Bereshis, the first Maimer of all, is a statement creating the heavens and the earth, like we said before, all the bodies in heaven and all the bodies on earth. That's all concluded in Bereshis, a Maimer Kloli, a central or general, all-encompassing statement. The klolos hayedihi. Shumayim klal klolos in abriya. Okay. Okay, so let's just go back for a moment. He didn't explain what bina is. So let me I think we have to fill in a line here. I'll just add this. That the beginning, so what is the Zayar adding? It says, B'kulam b'chochma sisa. So he's saying chochma is the central first point. It's the Bereshis, Bar Elokim. It's b'chuchmasa, wisdom. But after that it's fleshed out, b'bina. Because you need a creation to have multitude. Bereshis Bar Elokim, if it only stayed one mimer, you wouldn't have Rabu Masecha. Not sure why he doesn't spell it out, but it's pretty clear, implicit from the discussion. In other words, Bina is what breaks down the details to make it more Rabu Masecha. If you only had Bereshis, you wouldn't have the Hi'er, Hirakia specifics, and of course all the other species that are spelled out. And as the Alter Rebbe says, even though not everything is spelled out in Asara Mamoras, but they break down further. It doesn't say anywhere Yehi Evan, be a stone, but Evan is the Alter Rebbe brings us, is one of from the letters, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet within the Mamoras are created everything. So point being is, yes, it begins with Chachma, but Bebina means that it fleshes it out into details, turning into Rabu. So now he's going to say, so what is this idea? He'll get back to Tzva HaShamayim shortly. Right now he's explaining what do we know from the Tzva HaOretz. When we contemplate Tzva HaOretz, we see this multitude, which tells us there's a Chachma behind it, and a Bina that fleshes out that Chachma, all by Hashem. Yeah. So he says, what's the idea of a klolos hayediyahi? The mola oretz kinyonecha. What is the general perception or the general idea, awareness here from this contemplation on creation is that mola oretz kinyonecha. The world is filled with your kinyonecha. How would you touch kinyonecha? Your kinyon, your possessions. In other words, that the world is not a self-contained earth existence, it's all God's production, basically. It's all your kinyonecha, it's all your acquisitions, your commodities, your what did I just say? Your possessions. Shakolu elikus. Everything is godliness. This great creation of ours, when we contemplate on it, and you come to realize that something put it here with wisdom and design and so on, that you recognize it's all elikus. Remember, this is not in Hergish. It's in his bonus. Shekol Ayin haribui. This entire multitude, all this ribui that we see, that we described at length earlier, the ribui in the number of species, in each species, even in one tree, all the differences, says, Kol Ayin haribui, besides the fact that it indicates someone put it here. Who put all this design and wisdom? So besides the fact that it indicates an abeda, it also compels us, it also leads us to understand and explains, it compels and explains the Ayin of Hashgacha Pratis. What Hashgacha Pratis is, that the Creator is governing each specific detail and how it should function and in what manner and so on. So that's what Tzva HaOretz teaches us. Yeah. Okay, so this is what we learn from Tzva HaOretz. Avol b'tzva shamayim ksiv, by the celestial bodies, the heavenly body creatures, creations. It says ma gadlu masecha havaya shem gdele hanivraim. That's the greatness or the size or the largeness of the creations, creatures. Hini mehem anu yedim. What do we know from them? Ki me'ed amku machshavesecha. That your thoughts are very deep. Me'ed amku. Your thoughts are extremely deep. So till now, what we learned from Marabu Masecha, we learned Kulam b'chachma sisa b'bina. We understood the wisdom. Number one, there's a creator, and number two, that there's Hashgacha Pratis. But the words Mo'ed Amku Machshavesecha, we learn specifically from Gadlu Masecha, from the celestial bodies, from the heavenly ones. He didn't explain what yet. He's going to say now. Because it says, Hashamayim Mesaprim Kveit Keil. The heavens relate the divine glory or divine honor. Hashamayim Mesaprim Kveit, Mesaprim from the word telling a story. Sipur. They relate Kfeit Kel. In other words, they testify to God's glory, to God's honor, to God's, what else could we use? Covered. Yeah, like we say, like God's honor. Okay. The Isa b'medrash Tanchuma, Moshe Gibber gives an example for Hashemayim Mesaprim Kfeit Kel, because what does this mean exactly? What do the heavens tell us? So it says, he gives an example for a Gibber, a very strong man, a powerful person, a Gibber. Shenichnas leMedina, that he came into a country, traveled into a country. Ve'einen yedem magvurase, and they don't recognize, they don't know how strong he is. His house, they maybe know he's strong, but they don't know how strong he is. So how do you know? How do you find out someone? How do you test someone's strength? So the Medrash continues. There was one sharp guy. There was one individual that was a sharp, shrewd, smart person. Omar, and he said, "Min avned dahum is geishes ba atem yedim is gvarase." From the stone that he lifts up, that he can move and lift up. From his geishes is to move, I believe. You will know how strong he is. When you look at him, you can't know. You have to look at what he does. Like when you see weightlifters, you only know it by how much weight they can lift. So by the avnish, that's how you'll know. You'll know his strength. So the Medrash concludes, same thing, this mashal, kach hashamayim misvaprim k'vayit kel. Shamayim is like this avna, is this very powerful entity. So it relates to us and tells us God's honor, God's strength, so to speak. The Shamayim shehem anivroim agdelim misaprim, heavens, which are these immense, awesomely large creations. Misaprim, they tell us, they detzeln kfeit kel. Friedrich Rebbe adds the Yiddish, they detzeln. Yiddish has a certain, it's hard to describe. They relate, they really give over, they tell us the narrative, they tell us kfeit kel. Like the stone, the heavy stone that tells us how strong the Gibber was. So what do we see from this? That there's something that's Tzva Shamayim, its awesome size. And I assume he also means some quality. I can't imagine he doesn't mean it. We'll see if he's going to say it explicitly. Teaches us omku machshavesecha, ma'ed omku. The volume of creation doesn't teach us how strong God is. It teaches us how smart God is, how wise, chochmah, bina, like he said, b'chuchmasa, hashgacha pratis. But if you want to understand the depth, in a sense, like a deeper dimension, what is God capable of? So the awesomeness of Tzva Shamayim, they tell us that story. It's not over yet, so we have to still figure out why can't you say, for example, that the multitude, like how does that tell us more about God than volume? Because it tells us, it's like when you see something that's so awesomely large, it evokes a certain sense of awe that's even more than just the multitude of something. That's Pashtus what he's saying. I don't want to jump the gun, we'll learn it all inside. I'm going to stop here because now he's going to speak about Omnam Eifen HaSipur, how it's not similar. The story that the heavenly, the celestial bodies tell us is different than the story that the earthly creatures tell us. And he's going to explain this in more detail. And all this is coming to teach us, like he said, we're understanding B'muchesh and Aveda, the Bittul of Nevroim. So all this is a contemplation to help us achieve a level of Bittul, recognizing that there's Rabu Masach Hashem, recognizing the wisdom in the creation, of God, the godliness within creation. Shakolhu Elokus, like he said, Molas Kinyonecha. And now the Tzva Shamayim teaches a certain level of depth, which we're going to discuss further. So let's start.